poor seamstress finds a mysterious envelope hidden in her sewing kit, but when she opens it, what she discovers takes her breath away and sets off a huge battle against people she never imagined. Maria's fingers move deftly over the fabric, guiding it through her old but reliable sewing machine. The rhythmic hum of the machine filled her small, cluttered apartment, drowning out the distant sounds of traffic from the busy street below. Sunlight streamed through the faded curtains, casting a warm glow on the piles of fabric and half-finished garments scattered around the room. As she worked, Maria's mind wandered to her upcoming bills. The rent was due next week, and she still hadn't saved enough. At 35, she had hoped to be in a better place financially, but life had a way of throwing curveballs. She sighed, pushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear, and focused on the task at hand. "Just a few more stitches," she murmured to herself, her brow furrowed in concentration. The dress she was working on was for Mrs. Hendricks, a regular client who always paid on time and occasionally threw in a little extra for rush jobs. Maria appreciated clients like her. They were the reason she could keep her head above water, if only barely. As she finished the last seam, Maria sat back and admired her handiwork. The emerald green dress was simple yet elegant, perfect for the charity gala Mrs. Hendricks would be attending. Maria allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. No matter how tough things got, she always took pride in her craftsmanship. She stood up, stretching her back and rolling her shoulders to ease the tension from hours of hunching over her work. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had skipped lunch again. Maria glanced at the clock on the wall. 4:30 p.m. She had been working non-stop since dawn. Time for a break, she decided, heading to the tiny kitchenette. As she waited for the kettle to boil, Maria's eyes roamed over her apartment. It was small and worn, but it was home. Photos of her parents and younger sister adorned the walls, reminders of the family she had left behind in her small hometown to pursue her dreams in the big city. The whistle of the kettle jolted her from her reverie. She poured the hot water over a tea bag, the aroma of chamomile filling the air. With her mug in hand, Maria returned to her workstation, determined to finish one more project before calling it a day. As she settled back into her chair, her elbow knocked against her old sewing kit, sending it tumbling to the floor. Buttons, needles, and spools of thread scattered across the worn wooden floorboards. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Maria muttered, setting down her tea and kneeling to gather the fallen items. As she reached under her work table to retrieve a runaway spool, her fingers brushed against something unfamiliar. Frowning, she pulled out a yellowed envelope, its edges frayed and worn. Maria sat back on her heels, turning the envelope over in her hands. It was unsealed, with no name or address written on it. She couldn't remember ever seeing it before, let alone putting it in her sewing kit. Curiosity piqued, Maria carefully opened the envelope. Inside, she found a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. As she unfolded it, her eyes widened, and she let out a small gasp. "This can't be real," she whispered, her hands trembling slightly as she read the document again. It appeared to be a deed to a piece of land, a rather large piece of land in what she knew to be a prime location in the city. And at the bottom, in elegant handwriting, was a name she recognized: Evelyn Blackwood. Evelyn had been one of Maria's first clients when she started her seamstress business 5 years ago. The elderly woman had been kind and encouraging, always praising Maria's work and recommending her to friends. Maria had been devastated when she learned of Evelyn's passing 2 years ago. But why would Evelyn leave her a piece of land? And how had this deed ended up in her sewing kit? Maria's mind raced with questions as she stood up, clutching the document to her chest. She walked to the window, looking out at the bustling city below. If this deed was real, it could change everything. No more worrying about rent or skipping meals to make ends meet. She could finally open the community center she had always dreamed of, a place where she could teach sewing skills to underprivileged youth and help them build a better future. But as hope began to bloom in her chest, doubt crept in. It seemed too good to be true, and even if it was real, how would she go about claiming the land? She had no idea where to start. Maria took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She needed help, someone who could advise her on what to do next. As she pondered her options, a name came to mind: David, her old friend from high school, who had become a lawyer. They had lost touch over the years, but if anyone could help her navigate this situation, it would be him. With renewed determination, Maria carefully folded the deed and placed it back in the envelope. Tomorrow, she decided, she would track down David and seek his advice. For now, she had work to finish. As she sat back down at her sewing machine, Maria couldn't help but feel that her life was about to change dramatically. Little did she know just how right she was, or the challenges that lay ahead. Maria's heart raced as she approached the imposing glass and steel building that housed David's law firm. She clutched her worn leather purse tightly, the envelope with the deed safely tucked inside. The bustling city street seemed a world away from her tiny apartment, and she felt out of place among the smartly dressed professionals hurrying past her. Taking a deep breath, she pushed through the revolving door and stepped into the sleek lobby. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly coiffed hair, looked up as Maria approached the desk. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but slightly dismissive as she took in Maria's simple attire. "Yes, I'm here to see David Thompson," Maria replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm an old friend. I don't have an appointment, but—" "I'm sorry, but Mr. Thompson is very busy," the receptionist interrupted. "Without an appointment—" "Maria, is that you?" Both women turned to see a tall man in a crisp suit striding towards them, a warm smile lighting up his face. David Thompson looked every inch the successful lawyer, but his eyes held the same kindness Maria remembered from their high school days. "David!" Maria exclaimed, relief washing over her. "I'm so glad I caught you. I need your help with something important." David's smile faltered slightly at the urgency in her voice. "Of course, come on up to my office." He nodded to the receptionist. "It's all right, Sarah. Ms. Rodriguez is a personal guest." As they rode the elevator to the 15th floor, David studied Maria's face. "It's been too long, Maria. You look, well, honestly, you look worried. What's going on?" Maria managed a small smile. "It's complicated. I found something, and I'm not sure what to do about it." David's office was spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a spectacular view of the city. He gestured for Maria to take a seat in one of the plush chairs facing his desk. "All right, Maria," he said, leaning forward. "Tell me what's troubling you." With trembling hands, Maria withdrew the envelope from her purse and passed it to David. As he read the document, his eyebrows rose higher and higher. "This is quite something," he said finally, looking up at Maria. "Where did you get this?" Maria recounted the story of finding the envelope in her sewing kit and her memories of Evelyn Blackwood. As she spoke, David's expression grew increasingly serious. "Maria, if this deed is legitimate, it could be worth a small fortune," he said. "That area of the city has become incredibly valuable in recent years. But—" he hesitated. "But what?" Maria asked, her stomach tightening with anxiety. David sighed. "But it's not going to be simple to claim. For one thing, we need to verify the authenticity of this document. And even if it's real, there might be legal challenges. Evelyn Blackwood was a wealthy woman with a large estate. If she left this to you outside of her official will, there could be complications." Maria's heart sank. "So, what should I do?" David thought for a moment. "First, we need to do some research. I'll have my team look into the provenance of this deed and Evelyn Blackwood's estate. In the meantime, don't tell anyone else about this, okay? Not until we know more." Maria nodded, feeling a mix of hope and trepidation. As David began making calls and typing furiously on his computer, she gazed out the window at the city below. Somewhere out there was a piece of land that could change her life forever. But at what cost? Hours passed as David and his team dug into the mystery of the deed. Maria alternated between pacing the office and sitting nervously, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city, David finally looked up from his work. "Well, I have good news and bad news," he said, his expression grim. "The good news is that the deed appears to be genuine. Evelyn Blackwood did indeed own that land, and it seems she intended to leave it to you." Maria's heart leapt. "And the bad news?" David ran a hand through his hair. "The bad news is that a development company has been trying to acquire that land for months. They've been using every legal maneuver in the book to claim it, arguing that Evelyn's estate was improperly managed. When they find out about your claim," he trailed off. "They'll come after me," Maria finished quietly. David nodded. "This isn't going to be easy, Maria. We're talking about a powerful company with deep pockets and a team of lawyers. They're not going to give up without a fight." Maria felt a wave of despair wash over her. How could she, a simple seamstress, hope to stand against such forces? But then she thought of her dreams for the community center, of all the people she could help if she had the resources. She straightened her shoulders and met David's gaze. "Then we fight," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Will you help me, David?" A slow smile spread across David's face. "I thought you'd never ask. It won't be easy and it won't be quick. But if you're willing to see this through, I'm with you all the way." As they shook hands, sealing their alliance, Maria felt a mix of determination and fear. The battle for her future and the future of her community was about to begin. The next morning, Maria woke early, her mind still reeling from the previous day's revelations. She moved through her usual routine in a daze, mechanically preparing a simple breakfast of toast and coffee. As she sipped the hot brew, her eyes kept drifting to the envelope containing the deed, now resting on her small kitchen table. A knock at the door startled her from her reverie. She opened it to find David, looking sharp in a navy suit despite the early hour. "Good morning, Maria," he greeted her with a warm smile. "I hope you don't mind the early visit. I thought we should get an early start today." Maria ushered him in, suddenly self-conscious of her modest apartment. "Of course, come in. I appreciate you coming here." David's eyes swept the room, taking in the piles of fabric and the well-worn sewing machine. His expression softened. "You've built quite a life for yourself here, Maria. It's admirable." Maria felt a surge of pride mixed with a twinge of embarrassment. "It's not much, but it's honest work. I love what I do." David nodded, his expression turning serious. "That's why I'm here, Maria. I've been doing some digging, and I think we need to move quickly. The development company I mentioned, they're not just any company. They're Blackstone Developments, owned by none other than Richard Blackstone." Maria's brow furrowed. "Should I know that name?" "He's one of the most powerful real estate moguls in the city," David explained. "And he's not known for playing fair. If he gets wind of your claim to the land, he'll do everything in his power to discredit you." Maria felt her stomach drop. "What can we do?" David leaned forward, his eyes intense. "We need to file your claim officially before Blackstone can make any more moves. I've prepared the paperwork, but I need you to come with me to the courthouse today. Can you do that?" Maria glanced at her sewing machine, thinking of the orders she needed to complete, but she knew this was more important. "Yes, I can do that. Just give me a few minutes to get ready." As Maria changed into her best outfit, a simple blue dress she had made herself, she couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and trepidation. This was all happening so fast. The ride to the courthouse was tense, with David briefing Maria on what to expect. "Remember, just tell the truth," he advised as they climbed the courthouse steps. "Let me handle the legal jargon." Inside, they were directed to a small office where a clerk looked over their paperwork. The woman's eyebrows rose as she read through the documents. "This is quite an unusual case," she remarked. "But everything is in order," David pressed. The clerk nodded slowly. "It appears so. I'll file this right away. You should expect to hear back within a few weeks about the next steps." As they left the courthouse, Maria felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "So that's it? We've done what we needed to do? David's expression was grim. For now, but this is just the beginning, Maria. Blackstone won't take this lying down. We need to be prepared for a fight. As if on cue, David's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face darkening. It's already starting. One of my contacts just informed me that Blackstone's lawyers are preparing to challenge your claim. Maria's heart raced. How? On what grounds? They're likely to argue that the deed is fraudulent, or that Evelyn Blackwood wasn't of sound mind when she left it to you. They'll try to paint you as an opportunist taking advantage of a wealthy elderly woman. Maria felt a surge of indignation. But that's not true. Evelyn was my friend. I would never... David held up a hand to calm her. I know, Maria, and we'll prove it. But it's going to get ugly. Are you sure you're ready for this? Maria took a deep breath, thinking of all the people she could help if she won this fight. The community center she dreamed of building, the lives she could change. She squared her shoulders and met David's gaze. I'm ready, she said firmly. Whatever it takes. David nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. All right then, let's head back to my office. We have a lot of work to do. As they walked down the courthouse steps, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that her life had irrevocably changed. The city bustled around her, oblivious to the battle that was about to unfold. She glanced at David, grateful for his support, but aware of the challenges ahead. Whatever Blackstone threw at them, she was determined to fight. Not just for herself, but for Evelyn's memory and for all the people she hoped to help. The poor seamstress from a small apartment was about to take on one of the most powerful men in the city, and she was ready. The following weeks were a whirlwind for Maria. Her days became a delicate balance between keeping her seamstress business afloat and preparing for the legal battle ahead. She found herself spending more time in David's office than in her own apartment, poring over documents and strategizing their next moves. One crisp autumn morning, Maria arrived at the law firm to find David pacing his office, a worried expression on his face. "What's wrong?" she asked, her heart sinking. David handed her a newspaper. "They've gone public with their accusations." Maria's eyes widened as she read the headline. Local seamstress accused of fraud in high-stakes land dispute. The article painted her as a conniving opportunist who had manipulated a lonely old woman for financial gain. "This is horrible," Maria whispered, her hands shaking. "How can they say these things about me?" David's expression softened. "It's a tactic, Maria. They're trying to pressure you into giving up, but we won't let them win." Just then, David's assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Thompson, there's a Ms. Rodriguez here to see you. She says she's Maria's sister?" Maria's head snapped up in surprise. "Elena? But she's supposed to be in California." A moment later, a young woman burst into the office, her eyes blazing. "Maria, why didn't you tell me what was going on? I had to find out from the news." Maria stood, embracing her sister tightly. "Elena, I'm so sorry. Everything's been happening so fast and I didn't want to worry you." Elena pulled back, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "Well, I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere until this is sorted out." As the sisters caught up, David watched with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said slowly, "having Elena here might actually work in our favor. It shows you have family support, which could help counter their portrayal of you as an isolated opportunist." The next few days were a flurry of activity. Elena threw herself into helping, using her skills as a social media manager to start a grassroots campaign in support of Maria. They shared stories of Maria's kindness and dedication to her craft, and slowly but surely, public opinion began to shift. Meanwhile, David worked tirelessly on their legal strategy. He managed to uncover records of Evelyn Blackwood's numerous visits to Maria's shop, as well as receipts for the many garments Maria had altered for her over the years. "This proves you had a long-standing relationship," David explained. "It supports our claim that Evelyn's gift was a deliberate act of kindness, not manipulation on your part." As they prepared for the upcoming court date, Maria found herself reflecting on Evelyn's impact on her life. She remembered the elderly woman's encouragement when she was just starting out, the way Evelyn had always believed in her talent. "You know," Maria said softly one evening as they were wrapping up their preparations, "win or lose, I want to honor Evelyn's memory. If we win this case, I'm going to use that land to build something that would make her proud." Elena squeezed her sister's hand. "She'd be proud of you no matter what, Maria. Look at how you're standing up for yourself." The night before the trial, Maria could barely sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind racing with all the possible outcomes. What if they lost? What if Blackstone's lawyers managed to convince everyone that she was a fraud? As dawn broke, Maria got up and made her way to her sewing machine. The familiar hum of the machine calmed her nerves as she worked on a simple alteration. This was who she was, a hardworking seamstress who had built her life stitch by stitch. No matter what happened in court, nothing could take that away from her. A few hours later, Elena found her still at the machine. "It's time, sis," she said gently. "Are you ready?" Maria took a deep breath, running her hands over the fabric one last time. She thought of Evelyn, of the community she hoped to help, of all the people who had supported her through this ordeal. She stood up, smoothing down her best dress, the one she had made especially for this day. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady and clear. As they left the apartment, Maria paused to look back at her humble home. Whatever happened today, she knew her life would never be the same. But with her sister by her side and David's unwavering support, she felt prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The sisters made their way down the street, heading towards the courthouse where their future would be decided. Maria's steps were firm, her head held high. She was no longer just a poor seamstress fighting against impossible odds. She was a woman standing up for what was right, ready to face the world and make her case. The courthouse loomed before Maria, its stone facade imposing and intimidating. She felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach as she climbed the steps, Elena and David flanking her on either side. The click of cameras and murmur of reporters reminded her that this case had garnered more attention than she'd ever imagined. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with hushed conversations. Maria's eyes were drawn to the other side of the room, where Richard Blackstone sat with his team of lawyers. His steely gaze met hers for a moment, and she felt a chill run down her spine. "Don't let him intimidate you," David whispered, noticing her discomfort. "Remember, we have truth on our side." As they took their seats, the bailiff called the court to order. The judge, a stern-looking woman with graying hair, surveyed the room before speaking. "We are here today to address the matter of the land deed left by the late Evelyn Blackwood," she began. "Mr. Thompson, you may present your case." David stood, his posture confident as he addressed the court. He outlined the history of Maria's relationship with Evelyn, presenting the evidence they had gathered, receipts, testimonials from other clients, and even old photographs of Maria and Evelyn together. "Your Honor," David concluded, "Ms. Rodriguez is not an opportunist, but a hardworking woman who formed a genuine friendship with Mrs. Blackwood. The land deed was a final act of kindness from a woman who recognized and appreciated Maria's character." As David sat down, Maria felt a surge of gratitude. He had presented their case beautifully, painting a picture of her relationship with Evelyn that felt true and heartfelt. Then it was Blackstone's turn. His lead lawyer, a sharp-featured man named Mr. Hawkins, stood up. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "While Mr. Thompson's story is touching, it is just that, a story. We have evidence that suggests Ms. Rodriguez took advantage of Mrs. Blackwood's declining health and manipulated her into signing over this valuable piece of land." Maria's heart raced as Hawkins presented their so-called evidence, out-of-context quotes from Evelyn's medical records, suggesting she had been confused in her final years, and testimony from a distant relative who claimed Evelyn would never have given away such valuable property. "Ms. Rodriguez," Mr. Hawkins began, his tone condescending, "can you explain why a wealthy woman like Mrs. Blackwood would leave such valuable property to a simple seamstress?" Maria felt a flash of anger at his dismissive tone, but she kept her voice steady. Mrs. Blackwood, Evelyn, was more than just a client. She was a friend and a mentor. She encouraged me when I was just starting out, and she believed in my dream of one day opening a community center to teach sewing skills to underprivileged youth. And this dream conveniently aligned with acquiring a piece of prime real estate? Hawkins pressed. Objection, Your Honor, David interjected. Counsel is editorializing. Sustained, the judge agreed. Mr. Hawkins, please stick to questions. Hawkins changed tack. Ms. Rodriguez, isn't it true that you were struggling financially at the time of Mrs. Blackwood's passing? Maria felt her cheeks flush. Yes, I was. I still am. But that doesn't mean... So you had every reason to fabricate this deed, Hawkins interrupted. Objection, David called out again. Withdrawn, Hawkins said smoothly. No further questions, Your Honor. As Maria stepped down from the stand, she felt drained. Had she said enough? Had she convinced anyone of her sincerity? The rest of the day passed in a blur of testimonies and legal arguments. As the session came to a close, the judge announced that she would need time to review all the evidence before making a decision. Outside the courthouse, Maria faced a barrage of questions from reporters. She felt overwhelmed until Elena stepped in, fielding questions with practiced ease and steering her sister away from the crowd. You did great in there, Elena assured her as they walked down the street. You spoke from the heart, and people could see that. David nodded in agreement. It's not over yet, but I think we made a strong case. Now we just have to wait. As they parted ways, Maria felt a mix of exhaustion and hope. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time since this ordeal began, she felt like she had a fighting chance. That night, as she lay in bed, Maria's mind raced with thoughts of the trial, but amidst the worry, she found herself thinking of Evelyn, her kindness, her encouragement, her belief in Maria's potential. Whatever the outcome, Maria was determined to honor that belief. With that resolve, she finally drifted off to sleep, ready to face whatever the next day might bring. The days following the trial dragged on endlessly for Maria. She tried to lose herself in her work, the rhythmic hum of her sewing machine providing a comforting distraction. But her mind kept wandering back to the courtroom, replaying every moment, wondering if she could have said or done anything differently. Elena had returned to California, reluctantly leaving her sister with promises to return as soon as the verdict was announced. David called daily with updates, but there was little news to share. The waiting was excruciating. One afternoon, as Maria was putting the finishing touches on a wedding dress, her phone rang. Her heart leapt when she saw it was David. Maria, his voice was tense. I need you to come to my office right away. There's been a development. Anxiety gnawed at her as she made her way to David's law firm. When she arrived, she found not only David, but also a distinguished-looking older man she didn't recognize. Maria, this is Judge Simmons, David introduced them. He's a retired judge who's been following our case. He has some interesting information. Judge Simmons nodded gravely. Ms. Rodriguez, I've been doing some independent research into your case, and I've uncovered something that could change everything. Maria's breath caught in her throat. What is it? The judge pulled out a folder. I've found evidence that suggests Richard Blackstone may have had prior knowledge of Mrs. Blackwood's intention to leave you the land. In fact, it appears he may have attempted to pressure her into changing her mind. David's eyes widened. That would explain why he's been so aggressive in trying to discredit Maria. If this is true, it's not just about the land, it's about covering up his own unethical behavior. Maria's mind reeled. But how can we prove this? Judge Simmons smiled. That's where I come in. I still have connections in the legal community. With your permission, I'd like to assist Mr. Thompson in presenting this new evidence to the court. Hope blossomed in Maria's chest. This could be the break they needed, but a nagging doubt remained. Won't they question why a retired judge is getting involved in my case? The judge's expression softened. Ms. Rodriguez, I've spent my career watching the powerful take advantage of those less fortunate. When I heard about your case, I couldn't stand idly by. Sometimes justice needs a little help." Tears welled up in Maria's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. David and Judge Simmons worked tirelessly to compile the new evidence and present it to the court. Maria found herself once again thrust into the spotlight as news of the development broke. This time, however, the tide of public opinion seemed to be turning in her favor. People were captivated by the story of the humble seamstress standing up to a powerful businessman. Social media buzzed with supportive messages, and local news outlets ran features on Maria's background and her plans for the community center. Even some of Blackstone's former associates began to come forward, sharing stories of his cutthroat business practices. The narrative was shifting, and Maria could feel the momentum building. One evening, as Maria was closing up her shop, she was surprised to find an elderly woman waiting outside. The woman introduced herself as Margaret, a former housekeeper for Evelyn Blackwood. "I've been following your case, dear," Margaret said, her eyes kind. "I wanted you to know that Evelyn often spoke of you. She was so proud of your hard work and your kind heart. She would be thrilled to see you fighting for what's right." Maria felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you for telling me that. It means more than you know." As Margaret left, Maria felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about honoring Evelyn's memory and standing up for what was right. The next morning, Maria received a call from David. The judge had agreed to reopen the case in light of the new evidence. They were to appear in court the following day. That night, as Maria prepared for bed, she found herself filled with a sense of calm determination. Whatever happened tomorrow, she knew she had done everything she could. She had stayed true to herself and to Evelyn's memory. As she drifted off to sleep, Maria allowed herself to dream of the future, of the lives she could change if she won, of the community she could build. But even if things didn't go her way, she realized she had already gained something invaluable: the courage to stand up for herself and fight for what she believed in. Tomorrow would bring what it would. But for now, Maria slept peacefully, ready to face whatever challenges the new day might bring. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Maria took her seat beside David. The air felt charged with tension, and she could feel the weight of countless eyes upon her. Across the aisle, Richard Blackstone sat with his team of lawyers, his face an impassive mask. As the judge entered and called the court to order, Maria took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. This was it, the moment that could change everything. "We are here today to review new evidence in the case of Rodriguez versus Blackstone Developments," the judge began. "Mr. Thompson, you may present your findings." David stood, his posture confident. "Your Honor, we have uncovered evidence that Mr. Blackstone was not only aware of Mrs. Blackwood's intention to leave the land to Ms. Rodriguez, but actively attempted to interfere with this decision." A murmur rippled through the courtroom as David presented the evidence Judge Simmons had helped uncover. There were emails between Blackstone and his associates discussing ways to pressure Evelyn, testimonies from former employees about Blackstone's obsession with acquiring the land, and even a recorded phone conversation where Blackstone could be heard threatening to contest any will that didn't favor his company. As David spoke, Maria watched Blackstone's face. His cool facade began to crack, a flicker of worry crossing his features. For the first time, she saw uncertainty in his eyes. When it was the defense's turn to respond, Blackstone's lawyer seemed flustered. He attempted to discredit the new evidence, but his arguments felt weak and unconvincing. Then, in a surprising turn of events, one of Blackstone's junior lawyers stood up. "Your Honor, if I may," he said, his voice shaking slightly, I can no longer in good conscience continue to support Mr. Blackstone's claims." The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. The young lawyer went on to reveal that he had personally witnessed Blackstone's attempts to manipulate the situation, confirming the validity of the new evidence. As the revelations unfolded, Maria felt a mix of emotions wash over her: relief, vindication, and a touch of sadness for the depths to which Blackstone had sunk in his pursuit of wealth and power. The judge called for order, her expression grave. In light of this new information, I believe we need to take a recess to fully review all the evidence. We will reconvene tomorrow morning for my final decision. As they left the courtroom, Maria was once again surrounded by reporters clamoring for a statement. This time, she felt ready to speak. "I never wanted this to become such a complex legal battle," she said, her voice steady. "All I've ever wanted was to honor my friend Evelyn's wishes and use this gift to help our community. I hope that soon we can put this behind us and focus on building something positive for the future." Later that evening, as Maria sat in her apartment with David and Elena, who had flown back for the final hearing, there was a knock at the door. To their surprise, it was Richard Blackstone himself. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said, his voice lacking its usual bravado. "May I come in?" Maria hesitated for a moment before nodding. Blackstone entered, looking uncharacteristically humble. "I've come to offer a settlement," he said without preamble. "I'm willing to drop all claims to the land and provide additional funding for your community center project in exchange for you agreeing not to pursue any legal action against me or my company." The room fell silent as Maria processed his words. She looked at David, who gave a slight nod, indicating that the offer was legally sound. "Mr. Blackstone," Maria said finally, "I appreciate your offer. But this was never about money for me. It was about doing what's right and honoring Evelyn's memory. I think we should let the judge make her decision tomorrow." Blackstone's eyes widened slightly, clearly not used to having his offers rejected. But after a moment, he nodded. "I understand. For what it's worth, Ms. Rodriguez, I underestimated you. Whatever happens tomorrow, you've earned my respect." As he left, Maria felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Regardless of the outcome, she knew she had stayed true to her principles. That night, as she lay in bed, Maria thought about how far she had come. From a struggling seamstress to someone who stood up against one of the most powerful men in the city. Whatever the judge decided tomorrow, Maria knew she had already won something invaluable. The knowledge that she had the strength to fight for what she believed in. As sleep finally claimed her, Maria's last thoughts were of Evelyn and the community center she hoped to build. Tomorrow would bring the final verdict, but tonight she rested easy, knowing she had done all she could to honor her friend's legacy. The morning of the final verdict dawned bright and clear. Maria stood before her mirror, smoothing down the simple yet elegant dress she had made for this momentous day. Her fingers trembled slightly as she fastened a small brooch, a gift from Evelyn years ago, to her collar. "You've got this, sis," Elena said, appearing in the doorway. "No matter what happens today, I'm proud of you." Maria smiled at her sister's reflection. "Thank you, Elena, for everything." They made their way to the courthouse, where David was waiting for them on the steps. His face was a mixture of anticipation and determination. "Are you ready?" he asked as they approached. Maria took a deep breath and nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." The courtroom was packed as they entered. Maria could feel the weight of countless eyes upon her as she took her seat. Across the aisle, Richard Blackstone sat with his legal team, his expression unreadable. As the judge entered and called the court to order, a hush fell over the room. Maria's heart pounded in her chest as the judge began to speak. "After careful consideration of all the evidence presented, including the new information that came to light in our last session, I am ready to deliver my verdict," the judge announced, her voice clear and authoritative. Maria held her breath, her hand instinctively reaching for Elena's. "In the matter of Rodriguez versus Blackstone developments, I find in favor of the plaintiff, Maria Rodriguez," the judge declared. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by a burst of murmurs. Maria sat in stunned silence, the judge's words slowly sinking in. "The evidence clearly shows that Evelyn Blackwood was of sound mind when she decided to leave the land to Ms. Rodriguez," the judge continued. "Furthermore, the attempts by Mr. Blackstone to interfere with Mrs. Blackwood's wishes were highly unethical and potentially illegal. The deed to the land is hereby confirmed as the rightful property of Maria Rodriguez. Tears welled up in Maria's eyes as Elena hugged her tightly. David beamed, shaking her hand vigorously. Additionally, the judge added, her gaze shifting to Blackstone, I am recommending a full investigation into the business practices of Blackstone Developments. Mr. Blackstone, you may want to consult with your lawyers about the potential legal ramifications of your actions in this case. As the judge's gavel fell, officially closing the case, the courtroom erupted into a flurry of activity. Reporters rushed forward, cameras flashing, all clamoring for a statement from Maria. Feeling slightly overwhelmed but buoyed by the support of her sister and David, Maria stepped forward to address the press. I am deeply grateful for the court's decision today, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. This case was never about personal gain for me. It was about honoring the wishes of a dear friend and using her generous gift to benefit our community. She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. Evelyn Blackwood believed in me when I was just starting out as a seamstress. She saw potential in me that I didn't even see in myself. With this land, I intend to create a community center where others can discover their own potential, a place for learning, growth, and support. As Maria spoke, she noticed Richard Blackstone quietly slipping out of the courtroom, his shoulders slumped in defeat. For a moment, she felt a twinge of sympathy for the man whose ambition had led him down such a destructive path. After answering a few more questions from the press, Maria, Elena, and David made their way out of the courthouse. On the steps outside, they found a small crowd of supporters waiting for them, regular clients from Maria's seamstress business, neighbors, and even some faces she didn't recognize. An elderly woman stepped forward, tears in her eyes. I was friends with Evelyn, she said, clasping Maria's hands. She would be so proud of you, dear, so proud of how you've stood up for yourself and for her memory. Overwhelmed by emotion, Maria could only nod her thanks. As the crowd dispersed and the excitement of the moment began to fade, the reality of what lay ahead started to sink in. Maria now owned a valuable piece of land and had a dream to fulfill. The real work was just beginning. So, what's next? Elena asked as they walked away from the courthouse. Maria looked at her sister and David, a determined smile spreading across her face. Now, we start planning. We have a community center to build. As they made their way down the street, discussing ideas and possibilities, Maria felt a sense of excitement and purpose she had never experienced before. The poor seamstress who had once struggled to make ends meet was now poised to make a real difference in her community, and she was ready for the challenge. In the months following the court verdict, Maria's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined. The once quiet seamstress found herself at the center of a whirlwind of activity, her days filled with meetings, planning sessions, and community outreach. The land that had been the subject of such fierce legal battles was now a hive of activity. Architects and contractors came and went, turning Maria's vision for a community center into concrete plans. She had insisted on incorporating elements of Evelyn's old house into the design, a tribute to the woman who had made it all possible. One crisp autumn morning, Maria stood at the edge of the construction site, watching as workers laid the foundation for what would soon become the Evelyn Blackwood Community Center. The sound of hammering and the rumble of machinery filled the air, a symphony of progress that brought a smile to her face. "It's really happening, isn't it?" Elena said, joining her sister at the site. She had taken a leave of absence from her job in California to help with the project. Maria nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Sometimes I still can't believe it. We've come so far." The center was designed to be a hub for learning and growth. There would be classrooms for various skills training, including a state-of-the-art sewing workshop where Maria planned to teach. A library, a computer lab, and a community garden were also part of the plans. As word of the project spread, support poured in from unexpected places. Local businesses offered donations of materials and equipment. Volunteers signed up to help with everything from construction to program planning. Even some of Richard Blackstone's former employees reached out, eager to be part of something positive after the scandal that had rocked their former company. Maria's days were long and often exhausting, but she felt more alive than ever before. Each decision, each challenge overcome, brought her closer to realizing the dream she and Evelyn had once discussed over cups of tea and piles of fabric. One afternoon, as Maria was reviewing plans in her makeshift office at the construction site, David stopped by with some unexpected news. "You'll never guess who I heard from today," he said, a mix of amusement and disbelief in his voice. "Richard Blackstone." Maria looked up, startled. "Blackstone? What did he want?" David shook his head, still seeming somewhat bemused. "He wants to make a donation to the community center. A substantial one, actually. He says he's been doing a lot of thinking since the trial, and he wants to try to make amends." Maria sat back, processing this information. Her initial instinct was to refuse. After all, Blackstone had put her through so much. But as she thought about it, she realized that holding on to that anger wouldn't serve anyone. "You know what?" she said finally. "Tell him we'll accept the donation. But on one condition, he has to come volunteer at the center once it's open. I want him to see firsthand the good that can come from putting people before profits." David grinned. "I'll relay the message. You never cease to amaze me, Maria." As the weeks turned into months, the community center began to take shape. The framework rose from the ground, walls went up, and soon the building was recognizable as the haven Maria had envisioned. Throughout the process, Maria never forgot her roots. She continued to take on sewing projects, often working late into the night to keep her clients happy. Many of them had become enthusiastic supporters of the community center project, spreading the word and even volunteering their own time and skills. The night before the center's grand opening, Maria stood alone in what would soon be her new sewing classroom. She ran her hand over the smooth surface of a brand new sewing machine, one of a dozen that had been donated for the classes she would teach. In that quiet moment, the magnitude of what she had accomplished washed over her. From a struggling seamstress to the founder of a community center, it was a journey she could never have predicted. As she turned to leave, her eye caught on something glinting in the moonlight streaming through the window. It was Evelyn's brooch, which Maria had pinned to the curtain as a personal touch. She smiled, feeling a deep sense of connection to her old friend. "We did it, Evelyn," she whispered. "We really did it." Tomorrow the doors would open and a new chapter would begin, not just for Maria, but for the entire community. As she locked up and headed home, Maria's heart was full of gratitude, hope, and excitement for what the future would bring. The day of the Evelyn Blackwood Community Center's grand opening dawned bright and clear. Maria stood at the entrance, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nerves. The building gleamed in the morning sun, a testament to months of hard work and dedication. As the crowd began to gather, Maria saw familiar faces everywhere. Elena stood nearby, beaming with pride. David chatted with a group of local officials. Even Richard Blackstone was there, looking somewhat out of place but genuinely interested in the proceedings. At precisely 10 a.m., Maria stepped forward to cut the ribbon. As the crowd cheered, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her. This was more than just a building. It was a dream realized, a promise fulfilled. "Welcome, everyone," Maria began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "Today, we're not just opening a building, we're opening doors to new opportunities, new friendships, and new beginnings." As she spoke about the center's mission and the programs it would offer, Maria could see the excitement building in the crowd. Children peered curiously at the new playground equipment, while adults studied the class schedules posted near the entrance. After the speeches, people flooded into the center. Maria led tours, showing off the classrooms, the library, and, of course, the sewing workshop. Everywhere she looked, she saw smiles and heard excited conversations about future plans. In the afternoon, Maria found a quiet moment to slip away to her office. As she sat at her desk, her eyes fell on a framed photo of Evelyn. "We did it," she whispered, touching the frame gently. "Thank you for believing in me." A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. It was Richard Blackstone. Ms. Rodriguez, he said, looking uncomfortable but determined, I wanted to thank you for allowing me to be part of this. I've learned a valuable lesson from you about the true meaning of success. Maria smiled, realizing that the center was already changing lives in ways she hadn't anticipated. Thank you for being here, Mr. Blackstone. I look forward to seeing you at our volunteer orientation next week. As the day wound down, Maria found herself back in the sewing workshop. A group of eager students had already signed up for her first class, set to begin the following week. As she ran her hand over the smooth fabric on one of the work tables, she felt a sense of coming full circle. The last of the visitors trickled out, leaving Maria alone with Elena and David. They stood together in the main hall, taking in the quiet aftermath of the busy day. So what's next? David asked, a twinkle in his eye. Maria laughed. First, I think I need a good night's sleep. But tomorrow we start changing lives. As they locked up and stepped out into the cool evening air, Maria took one last look at the center. The sign above the door caught the last rays of the setting sun. Evelyn Blackwood Community Center, where dreams take shape. Maria smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. She had transformed a simple act of kindness into a legacy that would touch countless lives. As she walked home, surrounded by the warmth of her sister and friend, Maria knew that this was not an ending, but a beautiful new beginning. The poor seamstress who had once struggled to make ends meet had become a pillar of her community, a teacher, a mentor, and a living example of the power of perseverance and kindness. And as she looked to the future, Maria knew that the best was yet to come. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Now, how about another one? To watch another nice story, just click on the video appearing on your screen.